Once again, Priestley brings us to the chronology. So Gerald has split with Daisy in September, and here we are, November, and suddenly she's back at the Palace Bar. The chronology fits exactly. The pattern of the relationship also works exactly the same as Daisy Renton. She'd been drinking, she didn't have much to eat, and therefore was vulnerable, exactly as Daisy had been when she met Gerald. He notices exactly the same things about her. She wasn't the usual sort. And just as Gerald had noticed that she looked out of place, Eric says, I suppose she didn't know what to do. Not only does this suggest that this is the same woman, but also that what attracts both men is her vulnerability, the ability they then have to exploit her. Eric has conveniently forgotten just how he exploited her by claiming that he was too drunk to remember. Afterwards, she told me she didn't want me to go in, but he's forced himself into her lodgings, and there is a very strong hint that he's forced himself upon her sexually. He says, when a chap easily turns nasty, which is a euphemism for him actually using violence against her. And I threatened to make a row. Again, if you watch my video on Eric, I use this to suggest that actually he's probably raped her. And the fact that he speaks in euphemism, calls himself a chap rather than saying me, and calls it a row, does suggest that he's hiding from himself what actually took place. At this stage in her life, Priestley wants us to know that Eva is coping less well. After she has been abused by Eric, a fortnight transpires where she may have been involved with other men who perhaps have paid her for sex. The inspector alludes to this by referring to it as by appointment. But no, he meets her accidentally, and this time the inspector says more drinks. One way of looking at this is he's asking Eric if he was drunk again, but another way of looking at it is he's inquiring after how drunk Eva was. And again, Eric is attracted to the very things that Gerald was. She was pretty and a good sport, echoing Gerald's words, again suggesting this is the same woman. Very quickly it transpires, so next time or the time after that, she becomes pregnant. And here we meet Eva's morality again. She could have considered an abortion, which in those days would have been quite dangerous, but she doesn't. She worries about the child, but doesn't think about getting rid of it. There is the possibility of marrying. Eric must presumably have mentioned this to her, which is why he says she didn't want me to marry her. There's an implication that she's turned him down. And she'd told him that he didn't love her. In other words, she's still very idealistic, despite the choices that she's had to make in her life. It's really revealing that Eric adds this, and all that, as though to dismiss this idea of love. Again, Priestley could be saying that the upper classes lead a shallower life than the working classes. Working class people still have hope and still cling to this idea of a better future through love, whereas the rich are so used to exploiting people that they're very happy to exploit each other as well. Love is not important to them. Although Eva has very little power, the fact that she's going to have Eric's child gives her some small bargaining power. She says to him that she didn't feel like trying again for work. This is an extraordinary thing to say if she believes that Eric will simply discard her. But Eric obviously has some decency and wants to provide for her. He gives her about £50. So there were 10 shillings in a pound, which means This money is about 25 weeks' work at the Burlings. The New Year's Honours list would be coming out in January, so at most 3 months can have passed between meeting Eric and her killing herself. And we have to ask ourselves the question, where's all this money gone? One possibility is that she has spent it all on drink, so she gets through much more money than she did when she was employed. Priestley could be using that as a way to show how her life has been degraded by the way she's been treated. Or another alternative is that she chooses to kill herself when she still has savings. In this view, we would imagine she hadn't gotten through all this £50. But if that's the case, why go to Mrs. Burling's charity and ask for help unless she was desperate? So on balance, it seems that Priestley is using this as a way to show how she has become increasingly dependent on alcohol and is actually wasting money. He's not explicit about this, presumably because he doesn't want us to blame her. He wants us to sympathise with her.